Hi everyone, Nemo here. Welcome back to my channel, and as always, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe and stick around. Tonight I am joined by a guest who most of you know for his epic multi-hour podcasts, his stellar research, and his absolute refusal to pull any punches when it comes to his critiques of the church. So quite how I'm going to keep this under an hour, I'm not sure. But Peter, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. I have a great hat and life is good.
Yeah, I love the hat. I think the hat is brilliant. Who made the hat for you?
Lynn did, my wife. This was a deal.
Excellent.
That she'd make the hat as long as I didn't do the originally planned entire costume of sequins and feathers. So this is the compromise.
Okay, right. Well, I think that's a fair compromise. I really like it. It features in the thumbnail, and it's good to see it here in person. Do you want just, for those who may not know who you are, or may not know why we're even here talking to you, just very briefly, what is it that you've done to get yourself in this mess? What is it you do?
Well, I've spoken truth to power, Nemo. So I've a few months ago, I just started, well, maybe a bit longer than that, for a couple of years. I've posted things on my Facebook page, just where stuff has come up where I feel my friends need to be informed, because I think here in Britain we don't hear much about the politics and the developments and things in Mormonism. And eventually that evolved to me really exploring how can we deal with these problems, because we're all experiencing members of our families and our congregations leaving the church in increasingly large numbers, and 80% of our children leave. So it's a disaster. You know, we're going to disappear unless something changes. And I just started writing this incredibly long, even for me, sort of post about what the issues are and what we can do. And then I thought, hang on a minute, why don't I just record an audio? So I recorded an audio of it, you know, like a podcast. And that all evolved quickly. And now I have a podcast called Mormon Civil War. And it's got about 12 episodes so far. And had a really powerful response to it. You know, I've had over 10,000 downloads. You know, when I've released something, I'm getting about 1,000 people viewing a week at least. And it started to have a real impact. And so I'm kind of locked in and committed to this effort to have the church reform. So
it's the voice of warning, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So you are that voice of warning.
But also trying to focus on what the solutions are therefore going to be, while being realistic. But
which, shameless plug, that's what you're doing in podcast number 7, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And episode 7, it's like number 15 technically. I keep doing mini-sodes that are really long. But in doing so, I'm being very honest about what the problems are. I'm kind of speaking back to the church, what the people who've left are saying. This is why we left. These are our concerns. These are our feelings about the reasons we left. And that, you know, obviously puts my head above the parapet as a critic of the church's leaders. And that's totally verboten in the church. It's just forbidden.
Yes.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
So over a period of time, I've ended up in a court of love Wednesday week ago, and heard on a week later that I have been excommunicated.
Right.
So today was my first Sunday as an excommunicant.
Oh dear. Well, I'm gonna not let's rush ahead of ourselves for a moment, because I do want to explore just briefly. I'm gonna run through a little timeline of how we got to the point where we're at. But I think it's important to mention that, you know, it's only you that can't stick your head above the parapet. I apparently am a-okay to do so, it seems. So just going to flaunt that a little bit. Exactly. So just a quick summation of the immediate timeline. You were sent a letter 1st of May, that was dated, so a few months ago now, that basically said that a membership council is being held in your behalf. And I'm just reading from it here down on my screen. The council was held, they set up a date for it, and they said it would consider whether your agitations against church leaders constitutes apostasy as defined in section 32.6.3.2 of the General Handbook. Now, you then requested the High Council, and you raised 3 very important questions, which we will get to later on. But as a result, it was delayed because social distancing measures in the UK mean that High Councilman weren't able to attend until slightly later on when things were lifted. And that's when you finally had it a week ago Wednesday. And as we know, you got a response a week later, right? Did you want to talk specifically about that response?
Yeah, because it had been a week waiting, and I knew that the state president usually emails a letter if he's sending it. We've still not received a hard copy, so I don't know if there is one in the post. But and it came sort of early morning. So during that week, I was like, "Ooh, have I broken the church? What's going on?" Your mind races. You think maybe they might let me stay, and it. So I'd had a long time to prepare for this and think through all the options and seeing positives in each of them. So I was disappointed. I think I'm most disappointed with the verdict in the way that it's been framed, or what I have ultimately been accused of, which I don't think is anywhere close to accurate or fair. And I'm just trying not to get too bogged down in feeling upset about that, because that's something was going to be the reason. There was, It's very hard to function at this level of criticism of the church leaders without it not ending well, as far as your membership is concerned. So I'm trying not to, get too bogged down in the details, but it was, it felt, because I got it at 2 a.m. I was tired, and I felt a bit gloomy, but I was a lot happier the next day. I perked up and got my energy back for everything.
And so you got that by email. Have you had a physical copy in the post now?
Not yet, no.
Not yet. Okay, that hasn't turned up. Okay, just want to mention before we move on any further, to those that are in the chat and live with us at the moment, there are 77 people watching, which is brilliant. If people want to put things in the comments, then feel free to ask questions, and we'll try and slot them in as we go. Also, the other thing is, if you want to really get your voice heard and you want to support the channel, you can always send us a super chat, and that will ping it up on screen, and it'll get it nice and open out there for us to look at. So remember to do that. Okay, so you got that that outcome, and a lot of people say it is, to be expected, that of course this was always going to happen. Was there a part of you that thought this may go the other way, that you may not be excommunicated?
Well, I'll talk a little bit more about the experience of the trial itself, which was actually very unusual. I was given lots of time to speak. It was very respectful. I sincerely believe that pretty much everyone there was coming with an open mind, and they'd said so. So you never know. There's always a chance of something more reasonable happening, because a lot of the kind of the dynamics that are in the past. So, we've obviously got in our minds people who've been excommunicated for telling the truth, really, about the leaders and what they do. So Bill Reel, John Zelin, Natasha Helfer, whoever, all these people. And often they're dealing with state leaders who do not know them very well, or are being very authoritarian and are really not got their heads around the issues. So my state president engaged with me early on. He listened to me rambling on a lot for hours, bless his heart, in a few meetings. He never really kind of engaged in the content of what I was saying. And to be fair, I was splurging. So there wasn't, as always, it's hard to get a word in edgeways. But he listened and was genuinely concerned to see if there was a way that I could sort of channel this anger and these issues positively. COVID kind of got in the way. He never really offered any opportunities to do that, although he felt later that he had, apart from suggesting writing a book, which I probably will. And so thanks for that.
Watch this space.
Yeah. So the preamble to this have been, respectful dialogue, taking time to listen to me. I definitely felt heard. I don't think I was understood, but I was listened to. And that kind of was the same vibe in the trial itself. And also a lot of the people there, they brought in a few extras to the High Council, because we haven't got a full High Council at the moment.
Okay.
So I was sitting there with someone who was my bishop when I was a young man. I haven't strayed far from the nest living here. 3 friends I grew up with, we'd just done all our teenage social life together and around each other and so on. So good friends, like people I love and care about. We've served together in all kinds of different roles for decades, you know. So
it'd be fair to say you felt the love in
yes,
that room.
Absolutely, yes,
Okay.
and it was expressed, and also what was nice is almost everyone who spoke emphasized that they can see I love Jesus Christ, that I love the gospel, you know, that wasn't in question as far as they were concerned. And some of them had been listening to the podcast and said they agreed with what I'm saying, you know, or a lot of what I'm saying. I think one of them said they agreed with everything, but anyway, so that was great. And I'd kind of made sure they came prepped as much as possible. I sent quite a long email to everyone I had addresses for when we knew this was in the offing, and in which I recapped the things I've been doing and what the concerns are. And we had 2 or 3 delays because of COVID restrictions being extended. So I think that actually gave some of them time to engage with the material a bit more. So the dialogue we had was actually quite informed and to the point, and was brilliant. I literally came out with that thing buzzing, which you're not really meant to.
Well, your state president stated that he read all your church-related Facebook posts from June 2018, which was 427 pages of material.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll set the scene. So Lynn and I, my wife, walk into our chapel, and it's all laid out with the big U-shaped table with the high councillors, and then the state presidency at one end, and you're at a table at the opposite end. And they all stand up when you come in, you know, all these respectful protocols. And it began with the state president taking quite a bit of time to talk about why we were there and what his concerns were. And I had half an hour to speak, and Lynn was given 10 minutes. And in his preamble, he kind of kept going on about how much he'd suffered reading this stuff. He's a bit of a stickler. He doesn't want to listen to the podcast. He reads it. He's a reader. Right. I've begged him repeatedly to listen to it on high speed so it's quicker, but he won't do it. And he just started rattling off long lists of all the things I'd said that he found offensive. You know, these names I'd called the leaders or terms I'd used.
Do you have any examples?
Oh my gosh, I should have written some down. I don't know, just some of them are quite extreme, you know, geriatric and liars and things like that.
I mean, I've called them liars.
Yeah, I know. And kind of, in a sense, constructing a case that I'm just being hostile and nasty without reason, and that's and also that I was labeling the members as foolish and gullible and so on. And also that I had been intimidating at church, which I was a bit upset about. That in lessons and things, they worried that I'm aggressive. And he kind of implied I come on a Sunday and start spouting the stuff in my podcast, which I absolutely do not. And I got to respond to that. You know, I'll get into that later. So that was kind of the gist. But it was
we have a quick question here.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry. We have a quick question here. Yeah. Someone said, Peter, did you record the event? We are standing with you. Thanks. I can address that quite simply. That it's illegal to here, even if we hadn't signed a document. We don't have we don't have single party consent here. It has to be both parties consenting. So if Peter was to make a recording, legally he could have action made against him if he were to publish that recording. So here in the UK, we can't
tell me that before. No one told me that. No, I was never going to record it because I know other people have, and it's fascinating. I mean, go and listen. It's riveting, and this would have been high drama to listen to in a sense. But I wouldn't have been relaxed. They wouldn't. It would have been a massive betrayal of trust. And my whole point here is integrity. That I'm here as a sincere, wanting to be a member of the church. I love this gospel. I want things to be the best they can. And you know, let's talk and let's do that with an atmosphere of trust, which it was, and it was brilliant. And I think poor Natasha Helfer, who wasn't even let into the building because she wouldn't relinquish her phone for her trial after being dragged to Kansas, It was, in a sense, to some extent, a victim of the fact that it's become normalized to record people's apostasy trials. I'm glad people have, so I'm not condemning that, because it reveals what actually goes on at these things. It's ridiculous. But in this case, it would have been totally inappropriate.
And so you took paper notes, I take it?
Yeah. We sign a document. You get sent a document that you have to sign that you will not make any audio or written record.
No, but as in you took paper notes in with you so you could relinquish your devices.
Sorry. Yes, absolutely. You know, I had my sure. Now, I thought I'd screwed up because I got so tangled up in the days before trying to get some podcast episodes out. I've been promising for a long time, episode 7 with the positives, you know, and part of the reason the state president's patience has run out is that kind of wasn't forthcoming as quickly as I'd hoped it would be. I'm sorry, I got really bogged down in the thought control stuff.
Yes.
There was a lot to get through.
There is a lot there.
So I just went stupid and tried to record that episode and stayed up too late and just couldn't do it. And so I left myself with like 10 hours to write my great speech that I was going to deliver and change the world at my trial. And of course, it was complete garbage with really bad spelling errors all over it. And I had no time to say all of that anyway. But what was brilliant is, so I made a few of the introductory points I wanted to, but what turned out to be the wonderfulness of it really was that the state president gave, in total, we were there for 2.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
He gave plenty of time to talk. And as well as his councillors speaking, he also allowed the high councillors to ask any questions they had. And that was great, because normally they're meant to just be silent observers, and then they can talk once you are out of the room and they're deliberating and just give their thoughts and opinions. So it was, so actually what I was expecting it to be like didn't happen, and it ends up being far better.
And so what's really interesting about that is a couple of things. We have this question here about, did this come from the Pharisees at Salt Lake? It seems like there's been a string of excommunications. My thoughts are that the standard operating procedure of Salt Lake is that they don't want the High Council there, hence that it's no longer a thing in the handbook, because they don't want the virus to spread. They don't want people hearing what you have to say if you've been labelled an apostate. And so that, combined with some of the other things you said, make me think, and I want to obviously know if I'm right or not. It makes me think that this was very much your state president's idea. Yeah. What do you think to that? Do you think Salt Lake were involved?
I don't think so. He, as a procedural thing, if you're going to try someone for apostasy, you have to consult with the area presidency, which he did, and he told me he was doing this, and that it had basically been left up to him to decide by them whether to proceed. He's got a bee in his bonnet, absolutely, and that's his right, as he sees things. So I don't see any need for extra motivation. He was quite motivated enough off his own bat, with as he expressed to me, that I needed to stop saying and doing these things, or it's going to have to be discipline. So in this case, I don't think they were leaned on. He may have been sent a dossier, I don't know, but he's a researcher. He knows how to do stuff. He can.
Your stuff is readily available.
Yeah, it's public. Yeah.
And like I said, he read the stuff. So.
Yes, yeah. In order to find a very long list of words he didn't approve of, and I was just so, in retrospect, that's my biggest frustration. Is he's read hours and like 400 pages of evidence of the leaders lying, of the leaders embezzling money, basically taking money on charitable claiming it's going to be used for charitable purposes, and then throwing $300 billion at property investment and the American stock market, while teaching that even the destitute must pay 10% tithing rather than feed their children. I mean, how can this not register with one's morals compass, Yeah. And another thing, I mean, I won't go into too much detail about what's said, but he mentioned in passing 2 or 3 times, and you've told people not to pay tithing. And if I could go back, I'd have picked up on that, because it's like, no, I've pointed out that Joseph F. Smith, the prophet, in 1903 General Conference, promised that when the church could live off the interest of what's in the storehouse, the church, God's plan was, he used that term, this is God's program for the finances of the church. We will not be asked for another penny. And we've reached that point. You know, the whole budget of the church is covered with 2 billion to spare every year just by the interest from the Ensign Peak Advisors investments.
I mean, shameless self-plug, this is what my petition's about.
Yes.
Right?
Brilliant.
I've made this point in my petition. It's just made it into Salt Lake Tribune, which was quite nice. But that'll be in the description of this episode afterwards. So go sign the petition if you haven't already. So it's a perfectly valid point.
So in effect, in retrospect, it did feel like a hatchet job. It's just picking totally out of context these phrases I've used, and the language and the tone, which speaks volumes, you know, about the culture in the church, how policing people's tone is used as a mechanism of control. And it's also used to trigger people to attack dissidents. Because if someone gets angry, if someone speaks with emotion that's not like, oh, I love the gospel, you know, another kind of real emotion, if you shoot the messenger, everyone is trained to just turn like ravening wolves and kill the messenger because they said they didn't moderate their tone. And it was clear that he wanted me to stay within reason, speaking gently, you know, not going outside the
doing what I do,
boundaries of behavior. And it works. And so that it just was very clear that was his bottom line. Looking at the bigger picture, if it wasn't that, it would have been something else. You know, this church, this culture cannot cope with people saying things are actually very wrong and we need to change them, and it's the leader's fault. It's not you, it's not the world, it's the general authorities. They have planned intentionally over decades to accomplish certain things which have basically corrupted the church and how leadership is meant to happen in it. And the great news, you know, the positive I'm trying to dangle in front of us all, is the church itself has the answer. The church's own constitution of radical democracy through common consent to moderate leaders making bad mistakes, to not have a dictatorship of the 12 apostles, which Brigham Young established at Winter Quarters and we've been kind of stuck with ever since. None of that is in the scriptures. None of that is meant to be how it is. There's nowhere in the scriptures that the longest serving apostle should be the next prophet. That's just a cop-out, so they don't actually have to get a revelation and agree. So they'll just go with the very, very oldest man who's about to die, and he will be the next prophet, which just sets us all up to endlessly have elderly leaders who are dying and very backward-looking rather than the forward-thinking young men who built our church and made scripture. So that's kind of what my main message really is about. It's about how we have major problems. It's not working. It's destroying the church. We can see it. Look around you. But who are you going to blame? It's not the world getting more wicked. The world has never been nicer. I mean, ever in history. Poverty is radically down. And President Uchtdorf gave a talk about this. You know, Dieter has tried to counteract this narrative that the world is ending tomorrow and it's all going to hell. He did a great talk in conference where he talked about how education is better for women's empowerment, literacy, poverty reduction. We're not living in the worst world ever. It's not Sodom and Gomorrah out there. And in all kinds of ways, the indicators are improving. But the membership, and because of what the leaders say, are locked into a kind of a mindset of it's tomorrow. They're telling the kids again, you will literally be ushering in the millennium now. They're just saying that like they did to us in the 80s, or you and whenever you were. You're a baby, aren't you? So us old geriatrics in the 80s were told we were the final generation, not you. You know, so it's just this whole nihilistic end times. Okay, people are leaving, but it's not our fault, and we don't have to do anything about it because it's prophesied that everything will get difficult at the end before the second coming. Becomes a huge cop-out to actually address the issues, to actually future-proof the church. So my concern is to future-proof the church.
Yeah.
And is there enough there that we can do that? And that's what I'm exploring in my episode 7s,
Yeah.
and have been all along. It's been there throughout my podcast.
Yeah, it's been a theme in all the conversations we've had as well, that the church is
Yeah.
the answer to its own problems.
Yeah.
If only we look for it. And so a lot of this is why a lot of the criticisms that we can raise, and that you particularly have raised, are based in Scripture. The church not living up to the tenets of Doctrine and Covenants. The church not living up to the way that it was established. And D&C is not perfect. There are internal inconsistencies within Doctrine and Covenants as well. It's not perfect, but it is the codified kind of beginnings of the church, right? And
I mean, Joseph Smith left a mess. No one disagrees with that. He told all kinds of people they're going to be the leaders. But if you actually look at what was actually canonized, it's very clear. As someone's commented there, the succession order is written into the Articles of Corporation of the Church. I mean, this is something to look at another time. Is that because they have just changed the name of the corporation to the Corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, apparently. It was that our legal entity as a church is the corporation of the president of the church. So that's like a financial legal reason to have an immediate succession to the next guy, because it's like the whole church and all its money passes on to the next president, and you can't faff about. You just want an easy transition. Otherwise, people are fighting over a $300 billion financial empire. So who knows if that procedural tail has ended up wagging the dog, and
this is what you get when you have that amount of money in the church as well, is that all of a sudden people say, well, why would anyone want to be president of the church? It's really difficult. So because you're playing God essentially with all that money. You can do what you like. You're cared for. It's the ultimate retirement. If you think about it, for the
and
sort of person
everyone
that has those
adores
aspirations.
you, and every word you speak is greeted as the word of God. I mean, you can see the appeal,
yeah, definitely.
And then you get dementia and die, which is what. And then while you've got dementia, other people start doing power plays. So it does keep setting up a dynamic, having the oldest dying person being the prophet, that you then have these periods of a few years of chaos, or people jostling for their
I reckon
agenda.
we should change it. I reckon we should have, when the last prophet is no longer prophet, we should have the very newest member of the church, no matter who they are, the very newest timestamp of someone that's baptized and confirmed a member of the church is set up to be the next president of the church. It could be an 8-year-old, and we've got to wait it out until they're an adult, and then can they start making decisions. I think that'd be much more fun. It definitely keep the church fresh.
It would. And that's kind of what the old Venetian Republic did. They had a weird kind of democracy where their doge would be chosen by a kind of a democratic process like that. It would be an ordinary citizen, not a member of the aristocracy. So they have been experiments with these kinds of things.
We need more of it.
I mean, there's so much here to talk about, isn't it? I'm just trying to keep half an eye on the comments, So I just wanted to respond to a couple of them that.
Yeah, sure.
I can't remember what I was going to say though, but what were they really upset about? So it seems the bottom line, upset about tone. It's about saying these aggressive things to the leaders. I've therefore stepped out of the boundaries of what is reasonable. And I could, I'll read a couple of paragraphs from the letter I had with the verdict, actually, because they'll kind of express, where
I was going to bring those up, I think. So you go for it.
Is that all right for me to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So, in preparation for the council meeting, I read all of your church-related Facebook posts from June 2018, altogether 427 pages of material. I've been really prolific. I also read the letters of support that you submitted. At the council meeting, you were given time to explain your views and your public activities. The council explored whether your agitation against church leaders and members, I'm not agitating against the members, constitutes apostasy as defined in the Church's General Handbook. The council proceedings confirmed to me that 2 of the handbook's criteria are relevant in your case. 1, you have repeatedly acted and continue to act in clear and deliberate public opposition to the church, its doctrine, its policies, or its leaders. And 2, you have shown a pattern of intentionally working to weaken the faith and activity of church members. I'm a bit cross about that because the accusation that I was given was just one, opposing the leaders. It was never the idea that I'd be opposing the church or its doctrines. Certainly got issues with some of its policies, but and that I was intentionally trying to weaken the faith and activity of the church members. I'll read the next paragraph and then I'll kind of respond, as it were.
Yeah, go for it.
Both your writings and your presentation at the council meet these criteria. Although the tone of most of your church-related posts since June 2018 has consistently been hostile and contentious, the publication of the Mormon Civil War essays marked a new level of hostility. At the council, I quoted some of the language you used to describe our leaders and the general membership. I do not know of any organization, religious or non-religious, that would tolerate this level of abuse directed against leaders and members. Your own purpose is mostly presented in terms of destruction, revolution, war, and rebellion. You made it very clear at the council and in your writings that regardless of the council's decision, you plan on bringing more war, anger, and contention to our community. And then he quoted a scripture about being gentle and kind and forgiving. There's several major problems with that. First of all, the statement that he doesn't know of any other organizations, religious or non-religious, that would tolerate this level of abuse directed against leaders. Well, yeah, there's hardly any other churches will excommunicate you for anything. And there's very few churches would excommunicate you because you had a massive rant about the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury and you disagreed. You know, they just wouldn't.
Yeah.
So that's factually inaccurate. And non-religious, any political party is full of members trying to topple the leader and saying they're a total disaster and advocating for reform. In the business world, you know, healthy businesses encourage, you know, criticism from the shop floor of the
They have whistleblowing policies for a reason.
They have whistleblowing policies, yeah. And that kind of brings us to, well, what's the alternative then? Which is one of the questions asked, you know, and the whole issue here is if the leaders are doing things that are wrong and dangerous and sabotaging the whole whole project, what can you do? What are you allowed to do?
Yeah.
And the bottom line is nothing. You are, you know, they've made the rules so watertight, you cannot disagree at all in any way. And in practice, if you try to raise your issues in private with local leaders, they can't do anything about it and they don't know what you're talking about. And they usually panic because you're an apostate and it will go really pear-shaped very fast.
Well, I had the same thing. When I went to my state president and said, I have serious concerns that cause me to vote opposed to the sustaining of the general authorities of the church, he said, I don't think there's a problem. And that's it. That's the extent to which the feedback comes. And I said, well, can we explore that? Do you have a problem? Like, are you saying my logic's faulty or that behavior is acceptable? What is it? And nothing, because you've got someone who has covenanted and plays within the rules of, I will sustain these church leaders. I will back them up. I will have their back. And a person in that situation is the person that you're meant to go to with your concerns. Whose side are they going to take? Not yours.
So one of the things I've been really tracking and trying to encourage people to rediscover is the original foundation philosophy of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was incredibly open-minded. It was highly democratic. No decisions could be made without a debate in front of church members in a conference. And people would give arguments. Different apostles would argue for different points of view. And then the people would vote. It was very, you know, it's quite robust. So people weren't afraid to criticize each other. And also this wonderful quotes from Brigham Young, from Orson Pratt, for example, all kinds of founders of and Joseph Smith, that truth is our religion. And wherever the truth comes from, we need to welcome it, even if it's the heathens, even if it's the infidels, they said, the scientists. Truth should, whatever truth is, bring it on. And Hugh B. Brown gave these wonderful talks at Brigham Young University that you can find on the BYU speeches website in the 50s and 60s in the last century. And something he was always saying is you've got to face the marketplace of ideas. The ideas that you have, your beliefs, our doctrines, have to survive scrutiny. You have to have the discussion. They have to be challenged. And if they are unjustifiable, you need to abandon them. He said you need to be willing to kind of kill your favorite philosophies if they prove not to be helpful. And he framed that in the whole point of Mormonism, which is we're on a very long journey of learning and progression. We are nowhere close to understanding everything yet. And Joseph Smith was adamant he never wanted the church to have creeds, to have proclamations that defined the boundaries of our doctrines and our lives. He just didn't want to do that. And so he said, don't do it, because the next revelation might change something. It might be something you've never thought of before. And he said the problem with these other Christian churches is they're stuck with these creeds that they wrote ages ago, and they can't go beyond the limits of those doctrinal statements. And Orson Pratt basically said, who was one of the apostles and British mission president for a long time, very successful, he said, you know, if you can show us where we are wrong, we welcome that. Thank you. Because you've just saved us from our own ignorance. You've saved us. We should thank you for pointing out where we're doing something wrong and need to improve. Because you've done us a favor, of course, you know, because we're here to be good and truthful.
And where is
healthy.
that now?
There is nowhere. So the crackdown is teaching, flipping that script. So I've been documenting how is it we've ended up in the literal opposite place to that. And it's this idea that they're teaching now that rather when you sustain leaders, all through the first half of my life or more, they're being held accountable to us.
Yeah.
We do it regularly, several times a year in state conference, general conference, ward conference.
Yeah.
It actually happens a lot. The leaders are put in front of us, and we have to say whether we're willing for them to continue to be authorized and do their thing. They are accountable to us. And that word accountability was just in every other talk in the 1970s. It was the core principle. They flipped it now. And again, as I've been documenting in the podcast, general conference talk after general conference talk, when we sustain the leaders, we are making an unbreakable covenant to completely obey anything they do or say thereafter. Only God
the power
can
of sustaining
judge them.
faith.
The power of sustaining faith by Henry B. Eyring is literally a sin we must repent of regularly before doing these votes. To speak or even think of leaders having human weakness. We can't even acknowledge they might be human. And if they do something wrong, which he acknowledged they're fallible, he then quoted George Buchanan, who said, only God can judge them. It is not our place. Now, that sets up a completely totalitarian system where you can never whistleblow. You can never say, please stop abusing my child. Please stop teaching false doctrine. Please stop breaking all the rules to the leaders, because we're meant to just leave it to God to deal with after they're dead or something ridiculous. It's a manifesto for unrighteous dominion and abuse of power. And
okay, so given the position you're in,
and the redefinition of apostasy, they've added opposing doctrine and policy. You can't even oppose a policy in public without it being apostasy.
I think it was you that said, if you disagree with the amount of paper towels that we ought to have in a chapel, then you're an apostate. Right? Because that's policy.
It's in the handbook.
Yeah. I mean, so I was going to say, your position here as someone that cries this voice of warning and says what the solutions could be, and documents these changes to the way the church is acting, showing how they've gone from more open to feedback to being less open to feedback, to put it mildly. Can you see now, given your position as someone that's just been excommunicated, how you can first continue to do that, which is the simpler of the two questions, but then second, what do you think can be taken positively out of this?
So first of all, the wondrousness of social media is that it doesn't matter anymore if you've been excommunicated. There is a huge community of people who are Mormon, active, nuanced, less active, ex-Mormon, and they're all talking to each other. They're in huge online communities. The R Mormon Reddit group, the ex-Mormon Reddit group, the ex-Mormon Reddit group, I think shot up in the last couple of years from 80,000 to 200,000 people or something. There's Mormon Stories podcast community, which I've really appreciated over the years, and other groups, the Restoration Table, trying to get people from all different backgrounds talking to each other in different areas on the spectrum. There is a thriving community online where you can talk about these things, where you can speak the things that are forbidden on a Sunday without being expecting church discipline, where you can speak freely. It's just a liberation, and it's so healthy because everyone is learning from each other, and they've already done the hard work to fix the church. They've been on it for decades. They've done the research. They've worked out what the real history of the church is. Everyone collectively is talking about the solutions, and there's kind of a hive mind going on of at least 5 or 6 things that would be needed for them not to have left and for their kids to stay. They've got all the answers, so let's just feed that back to the members, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my Facebook posts and so on. But for that to work, people have to wake up that there is a real problem and how bad it is. So yes, I'm going to wear dirty laundry from the apostles. People need to know they're being robbed. People need to know when they're being lied to. People need to know that they are running an intentional, very well planned, and because they're useless, publicly explained regularly, they keep blabbing it to everyone, method of mind control and a system for that. And they just, it's all there if you put the pieces together, and that's what I'm presenting. So with that realization, I'm then saying, you're going to find this out sometime or other anyway. Usually when people do, it's in a long weekend of Googling and their testimony is gone forever. I'm telling you the bad news, here it is, but what can we do to change it? Here's some ideas for reform that not me, the hive mind of tens of thousands of people who've had faith crisis and trust crisis with this church are feeding back to us that these will work. But also, I'm particularly with my episode 7 thing, I'm exploring what is there in Mormonism and its doctrine, its big ideas that you can still have a healthy religion with, that will win the 21st century if we get rid of these dysfunctional behaviors and restore people power really in the church, I guess.
Okay.
So that's the way forward. So, and as we joke, you become more powerful if you've been excommunicated. I'm a martyr for speaking truth to power. That's a good introduction, isn't it? And your second question was?
Well, that was my second question. You've answered it about what positives we kind of draw out of this the positive. Forward.
Yeah, I would just say, that there is a way within Mormonism's own paradigm to save it, in my opinion. A lot of people are skeptical of this, so I'm arguing my case. I'm presenting the best case possible for I've already done 7A, which has all 10 big philosophical ideas, and there's about 20 more for 7B. There's a lot of great stuff we could be doing really well and better than other Christians. I'm assertive about the strengths of Mormonism when we're not self-sabotaging. It's an amazing religion. It holds its own on the world stage. And often the narrative in post-Mormon communities is that, Joseph Smith just copied everything for everyone else and it's a bit pants. There was some of that, but there's enough there, I feel at least, that you can do better. But the other positive I take is the experience I had in that court of love, that it was not a stitch up. I think I'm pretty confident that the state president was not ever going to change his mind. He's been on the same narrative all the way through. But because time was given to actually have a dialogue, and a variety of people with their different experiences in the High Council were allowed to ask questions and interact, it ended up being a much, much healthier experience. So I just want to really encourage, if they're going to keep doing these stupid things, which are an act of violence, it's an intimidating power relationship thing. Although I did everything I could to take my power back. And it was great. So I went in, confident.
Yes.
But I would just say, please, anyone planning to run these things and have it go as well as it can, give people time to speak their truth and give time for question and answers that are respectful, and go at it with an open mind. Because that was a really healthy experience. And I'm sure it's given all of those state leaders lots of food for thought. And it had, obviously, they'd been thinking about it. That was clear in the questions they're asking.
Well, someone's on that
yeah.
vein. Someone's asked a really good question.
Yeah.
Ozzy Johnson said, "Looking at our motivations, Peter, stopping the decline of the UK Church. Did anyone in the meeting recognise there is actually a problem, and so something needs to be done? Did anyone recognise the truthfulness that the church is shrinking?"
I think they did. No one mentioned it specifically, but I'd mentioned it very clearly. I did the data, as part of my spiel was, in Britain, we're down to 14.4% of our members active. In our stake, we have lost roughly 25% of our active membership, and so is the neighbouring one. And I was quite assertive. I said, "What are you doing about this? You have dropped the ball." Because you're just, and I said, I know that half the people around that table, most of their children have already left the church, or they're on their way. So I think that is a difference in Britain, that they are realistic. They know, they can see their wards shrinking before their eyes. It's harder to convince some Utah members of the church that there is this sense of urgency, but that isn't something you can particularly argue with if you're being sensible. And I quoted that 80% globally of our young people have been leaving by 30 since the 2000s. So, and that was the Apostles' own stats. So I don't think that was necessarily the problem. But the thing is to then convince them why. Because everyone is highly conditioned to blame yourself for being weak and a rubbish parent if your kids leave. And it's the world. The world is getting terrible. And religiosity is dropping off in the world. But one of the messages the British saints need to scream at the people in Utah having this panic, because America for the last 10 years has suddenly become less religious. They pretty much maintained their church going at around 40% consistently for donkey's years, while it had stopped everywhere else. But they've now had a crash. And the Mormons there are using that as their excuse. All the kids are stopping being religious. It's not our fault. Well, in Britain, that happened in the 20th century. The Church of England lost most of its members in the 20th century, the Baptists, the Methodists, all of them. During that time, what happened to the Mormon Church?
We grew.
And we grew, and we grew. We were the fastest growing religion in the country, or at least our propaganda said we were, and probably right at the time. We grew slowly, steadily, ludicrous, stupid waste of, war of attrition that, still 80 to 90% of our converts would leave within days. We've still not fixed that mess. But despite that, we still grew, very wastefully, but we grew. So we have proven it. Having your entire continent lose its religion in a crash towards atheism is no reason at all to impact the growth of the LDS Church. And you think about our narrative is, if we've got the truth, then the people should be, of course, leaving those apostate churches because they don't have what we've got. We keep telling them this. You haven't got the priesthood. You don't have the truth. You don't have living prophets. So, of course, they should be crashing. But that shouldn't mean we do. They should be walking straight out of their churches into our one because we've got the better stuff to offer. So why is that not happening? So that's kind of the message that I think the British experience can offer to the wider global church is don't give up. Don't think because don't use that as an excuse. It's not an excuse. And we're so tiny. We're tiny. If you can't find like 10 gullible fools to baptize a week, never mind good strong converts. What's wrong with us? In ward boundaries that have hundreds of thousands of people in. And we go to church and we're staring at the same 5 families for decades, really.
Yeah, my town was a town of 80,000 people and it had an active membership of 100.
I mean, that's our fault. There is no excuse for that. You can convince people to buy some shonky product that doesn't work in larger numbers than we've been converting people. So really, we've got to look at ourselves. And yes, exactly. Ozzy Johnson said there, bring back the cultural stuff. They've killed the joy. Church is now utterly boring. They've killed off the activities committees that brought the community and the joy and the personal development because the leadership don't get that. They're not fun bots, the first presidency.
And why do they think we're losing people,
Yeah.
young people, to these life churches, right? These churches with bands and drum kits and this exciting sense of community, because we have a church that's catering to its old members.
Yeah.
Not just in the sense that they refuse to acknowledge the truth because it will scare those old members, but just like it's geriatric leaders say, oh, we don't need road shows, we don't need fun things, we don't need dance festivals, we don't need any of the cultural stuff. People just need to come to church and focus on Jesus. It's like, well, actually, they come to church and don't really focus on Jesus. And that's then another problem.
Well, you're going to listen to a lesson being taught that is from a general conference talk in which general authorities quote some other general authorities in a general conference talk, quoting some other general authorities in a conference talk. You know, it's, and even when we're studying the scriptures, we're not studying the scriptures anymore. We're studying some paragraphs in a manual that tell us what we're meant to think about these scriptures, proof texting or doctrinal points. And it's all just become so uninteresting and shallow and unchallenging. In what should be, as we keep saying, Nemo, the most wacky and exciting and radical religion in Britain, we've made it boring.
Bonkers.
How is that even possible? But they have, because they're boring. And they're chosen because they're boring. You know,
they're chosen because they're lawyers and businessmen.
Yeah. And managers.
No offense, lawyers, businessmen, and managers, but... You know,
there are other humans in the world, but the vast majority of the general authorities are lawyers and business. Like 7 out of 9 of the last 9 church historians have been lawyers. What does that tell you about what they're trying to hide? You know, I mean, really. Anyway, so these are the big challenges we're facing, and I'm talking about that. I'm giving evidence to support this. I'm calling out the leadership and the system that created them, because they've been selected by a system that's been, you know, chugging away for a century at least or more now, and replicating itself. And they've relentlessly centralized power into their hands. And they started doing it organizationally. They did female genital mutilation on the women's auxiliaries, the Relief Society, the young women and primary. They took them into the correlated power of the priesthood, ended their autonomy. And so organizationally, they concentrated all power in the hands of the Q15. And now they're ideologically concentrating all power in them, as in they are infallible. And even if they're not, you're not allowed to say so. It is a sin. And they're telling the youth, if you feel that the Holy Spirit is telling you something that seems to disagree with what the prophet is saying, that's a sure sign that that isn't the Holy Spirit. That must be Satan. The implication being the prophet is infallible. Therefore, God will never warn you that they're getting something wrong. And that's ideologically, that's spiritual abuse. That is saying...
Well, they said that those primary children, didn't they?
Yeah.
Joy D. Jones and Russell M. Nelson sat there and told primary children that prophet will never lead people astray. No, that's not what prophets do, is it?
Yeah, no, it's just... they're doing it in front of us. And that's kind of been...
all the paralinguistics.
What you've been doing with your fact-checking of what they put out there as their public-facing propaganda and films and things, and the general conferences between us and other people are analyzing this and saying, have you noticed what they just said? Like, we're not making it up. We're not doing he said, she said. Here they are speaking to you. What are they saying? You know?
And so what you've done is an amalgamation of all this.
I'm
taken all this together.
I'm trying to make it all... The thing is, we are used to being dominated by this culture and this system, and it feels impossible to break out of, and it feels impossible to reform or change. It's overwhelming. So my view is we have to get bigger than it is. Our God is bigger. God, the real God, is much bigger than this Pharisee nonsense. So to do that, you have to see it all. You have to take a step back. You have to put all the pieces together, find their boundaries, find how it works, what is the system of power here, and then have a bigger view and be like, we can crush that, we can fix that, this is what it will take, but it's not invincible. And they are scared of us. They are terrified. They look very invincible to people in Utah because they run the politics and the whole place. But we've watched in Britain that the Church of England, the established religion, its bishops sit in government automatically. That system, where the Archbishop of Canterbury had an opinion that disagreed with the government, headline news, people cared what they thought. They've disappeared. In our lifetime, they've gone to nothing. The average Church of England congregation is 27 people now. The newspapers are full of articles about just the epic disappearance of this whole religion. And no one cares what their leaders think anymore. It's incredibly rare they ever feature on the news. You can be a state religion and disappear. And that's the warning we need to give to the Utah Mormons. That's exactly where they're heading. They think they're invincible and they're not. And it's happening fast. Yeah.
So swerve us in from that tangent back to your excommunication trial, because people can find a lot of this in your podcast, and I encourage them to go and check all this out. But it's still been kind of good to talk with you about it. Is there anything else you think from your excommunication trial in particular that you would like to share?
I think, first of all, just that format of having the dialogue. But what was really wonderful about it is the questions that were asked were some of the cliche questions, but it meant I could respond. And so I'd given as an example, I think that in a way my favorite dialogue was, I'd given as an example of the leaders lying. Quentin Cook speaking in General Conference in October last year, just lying about racial harmony in Utah. That when the Mormons went to Utah, everything was lovely because they could do their own thing and their values were anti-racist. Yeah. And when what actually happened was, Brigham Young got up in the legislature of the Utah Territory 10 years before the Civil War, legalized slavery, gave 2 epic speeches in which he insisted that priesthood was no longer to be given to anyone black, and that if black and white people married each other, they and their children should be beheaded. And Utah was racially segregated from then on, and the Mormons enslaved, like literally enslaved, hundreds of Native American children, among other things. That's the real history. And he just got up there and told the literal opposite and just lied. And so talked about that. And so one of the questions was, well, our thing as a church is our authority. Ultimately, what's the most precious thing we've got? It is our priesthood authority. And that is the authority by which we perform these essential ordinances that are so important, the saving ordinances, the temple ordinances. It's the authority our leaders have from these key holders. How is it then how can we survive as a church if we acknowledge that these leaders were that broken and wicked and sinful, that they did things like that? How can both work? And one of the comments was, do I believe that Joseph Smith somehow contacted God, as well as all the bad things he did? So I said in response to that, sort of 3 things. First of all, I think Doctrine and Covenants 121 offers the flexibility to cope with that. Yes, it says amen to the authority of that man if they're being wicked in any way, but it can come back when they're being good. So God is gracious, merciful. Yes, we're messy human beings. Let's be honest about that. But God can work through us still, despite that. So that's a way to sort of frame that. Secondly, I said, you're actually setting people up for faith crisis. Because if you're so rigid with this idea that the prophets and the priesthood key holders have to be perfect, really exemplary in their lived lives, and you then find out one of them along the line of authority has just been terrible, was an adulterer, Joseph Smith, whatever, sexual predator, Joseph Smith, liar, Joseph Smith, and racist, Brigham Young, that breaks the whole thing. You're setting up people to lose their testimony, and that's an unrealistic standard to hold anyone to. So I just challenge them to think, is this actually a great way to go? Obviously, it's the way we're all taught, but
perfection's a ridiculous standard. I'm not sure being a liar, adulterer, etc. I'm not sure that's an unreasonable standard for God's anointed, but people do make mistakes.
But this is the reality people have to face, is if Mormonism has got anything going for it, we have to lower the bar that far. We have to have our prophets be not just average blokes, but actually quite assertively bad.
And a lot of people are looking for more, and so therefore they will leave. But for
Yes.
those willing
Yeah.
to stay around in that messiness, there is a way forward, which I think is what you point out.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, well, let's be Christians then, not Pharisees. Let's not set up the idea that perfection is essential. Let's learn from the Roman Catholics. I used to disparage them for this. I really get it now. The Roman Catholics are very kind of honest and integrated in their thinking about human brokenness. It can become too negative because it's like the original sin and you were born wicked and undeserving, which we don't go for. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's acknowledge that we do have human weaknesses, and we can talk about it, Henry B. Eyring. We can think about the human weaknesses of our leaders. We can acknowledge that they've made mistakes, because then we can deal with them and move forward. And it's this ongoing, and one of the other things expressed is the big fear. If you talk about these difficult things in real history to the members, my worry is you will break their testimonies. So I just said, that's a really reasonable question. Two things. One, they're going to get broken anyway as soon as they click on Google.
Yeah.
So you're not protecting them anymore.
They will find out.
These people are surrounded by sharks that are about to devour your congregation. So are you going to teach them how to live with sharks safely, or just let them be devoured? And secondly, it's that paranoia that has meant we've never dealt with these things. We've never inoculated our members, as Elder Ballard in one of his better moments said we should, to the CES. We've never resolved these concerns. We've never made the reforms. And they've piled up and piled up and piled up. Dieter Uchtdorf's mountain of sediment, of man-made expectations, good ideas, or so they seemed at the time, programs, but crushing the flower of the gospel, he said. We've never dealt with this sediment that's built up. So it's a big ask. You know, I'm taking freaking hours in my podcast to even begin to navigate and put the pieces together of what's been done to us by these people. But you get to the end. You can find the boundaries. You can work it out. It is quite simple. And just when it dawned on me that what everyone has been saying for years online was a real thing, common consent is the key to nearly all of this. If the leaders are accountable to the people, they won't issue stupid ideas without thinking of them first. I mean, they just flip-flopped again. A few weeks ago, they ended the Saturday session of conference.
Yes.
Now they've actually thought about it. They've realized that doesn't leave them in time to have all their pats on the back. You're a good boy. You can talk in conference for the men, opportunities. So suddenly God's changed his mind again and Saturday session is back, but this time with no designated female space, nice one. Probably
which someone pointed out to me online. Actually, I thought maybe that's progressive, but in reality what it does is it forces women into that shared space, and women, when they share that space with men in the Mormon Church, always come out worse.
They had 2 women speak at the last conference total. I would even buy into the idea that was intentional as a punishment for ordained women making a fuss. It's like, well, we'll take away your session of conference then, bye-bye.
But they can't be seen to be doing that, so they have to take away the men's one too, which isn't really taking anything away, because it's just like every other session of conference, except for the women can't actually go. Yeah. And the reason they gave for getting rid of them in the first place was that, well, everyone can access them anyway, so it's no longer our little exclusive boys club. Well, what's the point of it then? Because everyone can see it. I want to ask you one final question,
go
Peter,
for it.
because we're getting close to that time.
Yeah.
You have appealed this decision.
Yes.
What do you expect to come from that?
So my appeal is on the basis that even though I fed him 3 specific questions, I said, right, I'm condensing this all down. I know it's overwhelming what I'm talking about. 3 questions for you, Stake President. Please answer these. Engage with me. Do your due diligence. Prove to me that I can take my concerns to the local leaders, have them resolved, rather than going public with a podcast. Number 1, the financial corruption. In Britain, for the last 5 years, all the money donated by the Latter-day Saints in Britain, £1 million Perpetual Education Fund, £4 million International Humanitarian Aid, has just gone into a bank account to earn more money that the church doesn't need. None of it has been spent on those purposes. Could you find out, as a British state president, if they have any plans to spend that money? What's going on? And that's a tiny microcosm of what they're doing with hundreds of billions of dollars as a whole. But that's our British one. And if he engaged with that, that is proof. That's evidence that my criticism of the leaders is correct. Yes, they're hoarding money and committing charity fraud. 2 is the authority of the leaders. Doctrine and Covenants 2065 says that no one can have any calling in our church without being voted for first by the people. So this gets to the issue of common consent and how they are now running a regime that is not scriptural. As probably back to a winter quarters, no one's been able to come up with it not happening back then. First presidencies for generations now have chosen and ordained themselves in secret in the temple, then announced to the world that there's a new prophet, and it's been months before the members have had their first opportunity to vote to sustain or oppose it. So that is fundamentally breaking that one simple rule in the scriptures that authorizes their priesthood keys. So they don't actually have priesthood technically by our own rules. Therefore, I cannot be an apostate criticizing them, the leaders of the church, because procedurally, they're not the leaders of the church. They're imposters. And thirdly, well, what am I to do about this? What's the right thing for a Melchizedek priesthood holder, covenanted to protect the flock against wolves in sheep's clothing, to be a watchman on the tower, warning of dangers? If I'm saying, why can I not get on Facebook and say, they're robbing you, they've lied to you, beware, because your kids are going to leave the church because of this, because mine just did. And all those other people's kids just left. So I'm warning you, this is what's going on. Do we want to fix it? And the church has got about 10 years to live. So what am I meant to do? What is the appropriate thing if this is not? And so my appeal will be, I asked these questions to my local leader. He has not answered them, despite reminders to do so. He apologized for not answering them in the meeting. He said they were at the end of a long email and he hadn't got to it and he'd fallen asleep, though I had sent several other emails and CC'd them to his councillors and the High Council. So it's not really an excuse. So I'll say, and it'd be quite interesting because I'll be asking the first presidency why they ordained themselves without a vote first. Who knows if I'll get an answer? But that's the basis of my appeal, that the procedures were not followed. I was excommunicated without my questions, even any attempt to answer them and deal with the concerns I'm raising. Yeah.
There you go. So we will wait and see what happens with regards to that appeal, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on here if anything juicy comes out. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. We have had almost 200 people watching at one point, which is quite incredible. There's a lot of love out there for you, Peter. So do you want to tell these people where they can show you that love and support?
I want to really thank everyone. This has been incredible. The outpouring of support and empathy and validation has been incredible. The people who wrote letters to the state president supporting everything I'm saying what he's saying is me. This is real. This happened to my family. These are real issues. And the idea that I'm trying to make people leave the church or attacking their faith while they're validating that all the concerns I'm raising are real and harmful, and that I'm trying to encourage people to actually stop people leaving the church and stop the harm being done to them, has been very reassuring and so kind. So, you can follow me on Facebook. I have a Mormon Civil War podcast is on podcast streaming services, and also a YouTube channel of the same name. And and there's some great discussions that go on in those threads and on my Facebook page. Everyone's welcome.
Excellent.
And thank you for the support. It's really meant a lot and has helped me get through what is obviously rather a frustrating experience. The hats help though. Always wear a hat. Just get a hat for these things. As I said, I made the covenants you're about to take away from me wearing a silly hat. So why not have one for this?
Exactly. A hat for every occasion. Well, when it comes to both of us, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. We, as British commentators, are part of a select few. Joined by 21st Century Saints and a few others, but there's not many of us about. We know you love our accents. It's, why wouldn't you? But we need your help and support as much as the next person, and particularly Peter at this time. It'd be great if you can go over there and support him and help him out. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. All have a great rest of your Sabbath if you're in the States, or have a great evening if you're over here with us, or wherever else in the world you are. Have a great one. Bye now.
Goodbye.